Every email you've ever sent, every password you've ever typed, every secret your government has ever kept, all of it is protected by math. Math that computers today can't break. But there's a new kind of machine coming that doesn't care about that math at all. And the National Science Foundation just poured serious money into the network that will connect those machines together. This is the story of what that means, and why the clock may already be ticking. Let's start with something you probably do without thinking twice. You open your banking app, you send a message to a friend, you buy something online and type in your card number. Behind every one of those tiny, forgettable actions sits an enormous invisible fortress built out of pure mathematics. That fortress is called encryption, and for the last 50 years, it has quietly held up the entire digital world. It protects your money, your medical records, your private conversations, and the classified files that keep nations safe. And the reason it works isn't magic, it's difficulty. Modern encryption relies on math problems that are so brutally hard to solve that even the fastest supercomputers on Earth would need longer than the age of the universe to crack them by brute force. That has always been the deal. As long as breaking the code takes longer than anyone's lifetime, the code is safe. But that deal was written under one very specific assumption, that the machine trying to break it is a classical computer. The same basic kind of machine sitting on your desk, in your phone, and inside every data center on the planet. And that assumption is starting to crack. Because a different kind of computer is being built right now, one that doesn't follow the same rules. It's called a quantum computer, and instead of processing information as simple ones and zeros, it uses the strange, almost unbelievable behavior of particles at the smallest scales of physics. In that world, a bit of information doesn't have to be one thing or the other. It can exist in a blend of both at once, a state scientists call superposition. And two of these particles can become linked in a way Einstein himself found so strange, he called it spooky action at a distance. A connection called entanglement, where measuring one instantly tells you something about the other, no matter how far apart they are. These aren't science fiction concepts anymore. They're measurable, repeatable, laboratory-confirmed features of reality. And when you build a computer that harnesses them, something remarkable happens. Certain problems that would take a classical computer thousands of years to solve could, in theory, be solved by a large enough quantum computer in hours or even minutes. And one of the problems quantum computers are especially good at is exactly the kind of math that modern encryption depends on. This is where the fear comes from, and it's not paranoia, it's physics. Back in the 1990s, a mathematician named Peter Shor developed an algorithm that, if run on a sufficiently powerful quantum computer, could unravel the encryption protecting almost everything digital, including the systems banks, hospitals, and governments rely on every single day. At the time, this was purely theoretical, because nobody had built a quantum computer anywhere close to powerful enough to run it. But theoretical problems have a way of becoming very real once enough money and enough brilliant people start chasing them. And that's exactly what's happening now, on a scale most people have no idea is unfolding. So where does the National Science Foundation come into this story? For decades, the NSF has quietly funded the foundational research behind almost every major leap in American technology, from the early internet to GPS to the lasers that now carry your phone calls across oceans. Recently, the agency has turned a major share of its attention and its funding toward quantum technology, and not just quantum computers sitting alone in a lab. The real prize, the one that changes everything, is a quantum network, a system that can connect quantum computers, quantum sensors, and quantum-secured communication links together across entire cities, states, and eventually the country. People have started calling this emerging system the quantum internet, and while that phrase sounds like something out of a movie, the pieces of it are already being built with real fiber optic cable running underneath real American streets right now. The National Science Foundation is committed to a coordinated multi-front investment strategy to make this happen. One piece of that strategy is a program built to give researchers across the country shared access to advanced quantum and nanotechnology facilities. An effort funded at up to $100 million, supporting a network of up to 16 research sites over 5 years. These aren't just isolated university labs working in silos. They're designed to function as a connected national resource, open not only to major research universities, but to community colleges and small businesses as well, spreading access to cutting-edge tools far beyond the handful of elite institutions that have traditionally dominated this kind of research. Individual sites in this program can receive funding ranging from $500,000 to $2 million a year, and the entire structure is meant to eventually link together into something bigger than the sum of its parts, coordinated through a central office designed to help these sites share best practices, tools, and eventually network infrastructure. But the piece of this puzzle, most directly tied to the idea of a genuine quantum internet, is a separate initiative called the National Quantum Virtual Laboratory. This program is exactly what it sounds like. Not a single building you can point to on a map, but a distributed, federated resource spread across the country, designed so that a researcher in one state can tap into specialized quantum hardware sitting in a lab 1,000 miles away. The National Science Foundation began this effort with an initial $5 million investment split across 5 pilot teams, each receiving about $1 million to spend a year proving out their ideas. One of those very first projects set out to build a long-distance 10-node quantum network stretching across multiple institutions, explicitly designed to demonstrate what scientists call quantum advantage. The moment a quantum system can do something, no classical system could ever match. That project alone involved some of the most respected research institutions in the country working together, treating quantum networking not as a distant dream, but as an engineering problem to be solved right now. And the investment didn't stop there. More recently, the National Science Foundation selected 5 additional teams for this same laboratory initiative, this time committing $20 million total, with each team receiving $4 million over 2 years to refine their designs and prepare for a larger implementation phase. What makes this round particularly striking isn't just the dollar figure. It's who showed up to participate. These teams aren't working in isolation. They're partnering with major industry players, companies whose names you'd recognize from headlines about artificial intelligence chips and advanced computing hardware, alongside specialized quantum computing firms building some of the most advanced quantum processors on Earth today. When companies building cutting-edge hardware start showing up as partners on federally funded quantum networking research, that's usually a signal that the technology has crossed some invisible threshold from theoretical curiosity to something with real commercial stakes. And this is bigger than any single grant program. Alongside these targeted quantum initiatives, the National Science Foundation also launched a much larger, decade-long effort worth $1.5 billion, designed to fund independent, milestone-driven research teams working outside the usual academic and industrial structures. This program explicitly lists quantum systems, quantum interconnects, and integrated photonics, the specialized optical technology used to send quantum information through fiber optic cable, as an initial focus area. Put simply, the federal government isn't just funding quantum computers anymore, it's funding the wiring that will eventually connect them. Now here's where the picture gets more complicated and more honest than a simple headline can capture. This isn't a story of unlimited, ever-growing government spending on quantum technology. The National Science Foundation, like many federal science agencies, has gone through real turbulence recently, including terminated awards and proposals aimed at sharply reducing its overall budget. So this isn't simply a tale of more money flowing into science across the board. What's actually happening is more selective and more strategic, a reshaping of where the money goes, who gets access to it, and what specific outcomes the government expects in return. Quantum networking, and specifically the infrastructure needed to build toward a genuine quantum internet, has emerged as one of the clear winners in that reshaping, even as other areas of federally funded research face real uncertainty. You can already see what this funding looks like once it leaves a spreadsheet and becomes physical infrastructure. In Chicago, a coalition of universities and research institutions, known as the Chicago Quantum Exchange, helped build out a real quantum network stretching more than 120 miles, connecting 6 separate nodes across the region. This isn't a theoretical diagram in a research paper. It's one of the first publicly available testbeds in the country where quantum security technologies can be tested in a genuine real-world environment, allowing academic researchers, private industry, and government agencies to experiment side by side instead of working from separate, disconnected labs. On the other side of the country, at the University of California, Berkeley, researchers are building something called the QuantNet Testbed, a 3-node network connecting Berkeley Lab with the university campus, specifically designed to test something called entanglement swapping, essentially a method for extending quantum connections across greater distances without losing the delicate quantum properties that make the whole system work. That single technical challenge, keeping entangled particles stable and useful across long distances, is one of the biggest engineering hurdles standing between where quantum networking is today and where a true nationwide quantum internet needs to be. It's also worth pointing out that the United States isn't building this in a vacuum. And that context matters if you want to understand why the National Science Foundation is treating quantum networking as such a strategic priority, rather than just another line item in a research budget. Other major world powers have been racing toward the same goal for years, pouring billions of dollars into their own quantum computing and quantum communication programs, with some announcing satellite-based quantum key distribution systems and long-distance fiber networks of their own. Whoever manages to build a stable, functional, large-scale quantum network first doesn't just win bragging rights in a physics journal. They gain a meaningful strategic advantage in secure communications, in advanced materials research, in pharmaceutical development, and in the kind of next-generation computing that touches everything from military logistics to financial markets. That's the geopolitical backdrop sitting quietly behind every one of these funding announcements, even when the press release itself only talks about fiber optic cable and research grants. Framed that way, the National Science Foundation's investment starts to look less like scattered scientific curiosity and more like a coordinated long-term national strategy, one competing directly with similar strategies being pursued by other major economies around the world. It's also worth being honest about timelines because this is exactly the kind of story where enthusiasm can easily outrun reality. Most serious researchers working in this field, when pressed for an honest estimate, will tell you that a quantum computer powerful and stable enough to actually break today's strongest encryption standards is still likely years away. And depending on which expert you ask, it could be anywhere from 5 years to a couple of decades before the threshold is reliably crossed. Quantum computers today are still wrestling with a fundamental engineering problem called decoherence, where the delicate quantum states these machines depend on tend to collapse or become unstable almost as quickly as they are created, especially as researchers try to scale up the number of qubits involved. Solving that problem reliably at the scale needed to threaten real-world encryption remains one of the hardest open engineering challenges in modern physics. So this isn't a 5-alarm fire happening tomorrow morning, but it's also not a problem safely tucked away in some distant, irrelevant future either, especially once you factor in that harvest, now decrypt later strategy we talked about earlier. Waiting until the threat is fully proven and undeniable means waiting until it's already too late to protect data that needed to stay secret for decades. That's precisely why the funding, the test beds, and the cryptographic transition are all happening now, years ahead of the moment when quantum computers are expected to become a genuine, practical threat rather than after. So let's slow down for a moment and actually explain in plain language what a quantum internet even is, because it's easy to hear that phrase and imagine something like a faster version of the internet you already use. It isn't that, at least not primarily. The internet you're using right now moves information by encoding it into electrical or optical pulses, sending copies of that data from one point to another through routers, switches, and cables until it lands on your screen. A quantum network works on a fundamentally different principle. Instead of sending copies of information, it relies on entanglement to link particles across distance, so that measuring one particle here instantly correlates with the state of its partner particle somewhere else. This isn't about moving cat videos faster. In fact, for ordinary everyday browsing, a quantum internet would likely offer no noticeable improvement at all, and might even be slower in some respects for typical consumer tasks. What it's extraordinarily good at is something else entirely, creating connections that are, by the laws of physics, virtually impossible to intercept without detection. If someone tries to eavesdrop on a quantum encrypted signal, the very act of measuring those particles changes them, immediately alerting both ends of the connection that something has gone wrong. That's not a clever software trick. That's a fundamental law of quantum physics working in your favor. This means the first real-world use of a quantum internet almost certainly won't be faster shopping or smoother video calls. It will be secure communication for the institutions that can least afford to be hacked: financial systems, power grids, hospitals, and national security infrastructure. That brings us back to the real anxiety underneath all of this, the one hiding behind Hook 2, and the one that should genuinely matter to you even if you've never thought about quantum physics for a single second in your life. Somewhere out there, encrypted data is already being collected and stored by adversaries who aren't trying to break it today. They're patient. This strategy even has a name inside the security world: harvest now, decrypt later. The idea is simple and unsettling. An attacker captures encrypted traffic today, even though they can't read it yet, and simply waits, stockpiling it, betting that a sufficiently powerful quantum computer will eventually exist to unlock it years down the road. For most casual internet traffic, that threat barely matters, because who cares if someone reads an old grocery list a decade from now? But for information that needs to stay secret for decades, medical records, state secrets, long-term financial data, intellectual property behind next-generation technology, that harvested data becomes a ticking time bomb sitting quietly in someone else's server, waiting for the day the lock finally breaks. This is precisely why the federal push toward quantum networking isn't happening in isolation. It's running in parallel with a massive effort to redesign the encryption systems, protecting almost everything digital, an effort generally known as post-quantum cryptography. This isn't about waiting for a quantum internet to arrive and then reacting. It's about rebuilding the mathematical locks themselves so that even a powerful, fully functional quantum computer can't pick them, all before that computer actually exists in a usable form. Government agencies, major technology companies, and international standards bodies have already begun rolling out new cryptographic standards specifically designed to resist quantum attacks. And organizations across finance, healthcare, and critical infrastructure are being pushed to start transitioning their systems now, not later, because Migrating an entire digital infrastructure away from decades-old encryption standards doesn't happen overnight. It takes years of planning, testing, and rollout, which means the institutions that wait until a working quantum computer actually exists will already be dangerously behind. So let's connect these threads together, because on their own, each piece of the story sounds interesting but disconnected. Quantum computers threaten to eventually break the encryption protecting the modern world. Quantum networks, the so-called quantum internet, offer a physics-based alternative that could make certain kinds of communication effectively unhackable rather than merely difficult to hack. And the National Science Foundation, despite operating under real budget pressure and real institutional turbulence, has chosen to pour meaningful, sustained funding specifically into the connective tissue that would make a national scale version of this network possible, from shared research infrastructure worth up to $100 million, to a distributed national laboratory system now backed by tens of millions more, to a much larger $1.5 billion initiative explicitly targeting the interconnects and photonics needed to wire it all together. This is what a strategic technology race actually looks like from the inside. It's not one dramatic announcement. It's a steady accumulation of smaller, deliberate investments, each one aimed at a different piece of a much larger puzzle, all converging toward the same eventual goal. Now, what does all of this actually mean for classical computing, the ordinary computers, phones, and servers that run essentially the entire world today? The honest answer is that classical computing isn't going anywhere, and it certainly isn't being replaced wholesale by quantum machines anytime soon. Quantum computers are extraordinarily good at a narrow set of specialized problems. Things like simulating molecular chemistry, optimizing incredibly complex systems, and breaking certain categories of mathematical encryption. But they're not good, at least not yet, and possibly not ever, at the everyday tasks that make up the overwhelming majority of computing work. Things like running a word processor, streaming video, browsing a website, or managing a spreadsheet. For the vast majority of what computers do every single day, classical machines remain faster, cheaper, more reliable, and dramatically more practical. What's actually happening is closer to a partnership than a replacement, a future where classical computers continue handling the everyday workload of the world while quantum systems get called in for a much smaller set of specialized, high-value problems connected to those classical systems through networks that increasingly include quantum-secured links for the most sensitive kinds of data. But there is one place where the shift will be felt directly, and soon, even by people who never touch a quantum computer in their entire lives. That place is security. As quantum-safe encryption standards roll out across banks, government systems, healthcare networks, and eventually consumer technology, the underlying math protecting your data is going to change, largely invisibly, the same way earlier generations of encryption upgrades happened without most people ever noticing. You won't wake up one day and see a quantum computer sitting on your desk. What you'll actually experience if this transition goes well is nothing at all. No visible change, no dramatic moment, just the quiet continuation of secure digital life, protected by math strong enough to withstand a threat that barely existed in the public conversation a decade ago. And if the transition goes poorly, if organizations wait too long to adopt these new standards, the consequences could show up in ways that are anything but invisible. From mass data breaches to compromised financial systems, to intelligence agencies suddenly finding years of harvested secrets unlocked all at once. This is also why the regional test beds matter so much more than they might initially seem to. A 120-mile network connecting 6 nodes across Chicago, or a 3-node experimental link between Berkeley Lab and the University of California, might sound modest compared to something called a national quantum internet, but these regional networks function as the essential proving ground, the place where scientists work out the extraordinarily difficult engineering problems like maintaining fragile quantum states across real-world fiber optic cable, dealing with signal loss, and figuring out how to extend entanglement across greater and greater distances without the whole system collapsing. Every one of these smaller networks is a rehearsal for something larger. And, as the Forbes analysis of this landscape put it, the real competition ahead won't be won by whichever region generates the flashiest press release. It will be won by whichever regions manage to successfully combine fiber infrastructure, advanced photonics, functioning test beds, trained workforce, and a path toward commercialization into one coherent working system. That workforce piece deserves its own moment of attention, because it's easy to focus entirely on the hardware and the funding numbers while forgetting that none of this works without people who understand how to build, operate, and secure it. Part of the National Science Foundation's broader quantum strategy is explicitly about training the next generation of scientists and engineers who will actually run these systems once they're built, ensuring that the expertise required to operate a national quantum network doesn't remain locked inside a handful of elite institutions. This is a slower, less flashy part of the story, but it may end up being just as important as any single grant, because a quantum internet built without enough trained people to maintain and secure it would be a fragile achievement at best. So, Where does this actually leave us, standing here in the middle of this transition rather than at some clean, dramatic finish line? The National Science Foundation has not flipped a switch and turned on a fully operational national quantum internet, and nobody serious in this field is claiming that it has. What has genuinely happened is something more foundational and, in some ways, more consequential. Multiple coordinated funding streams, tens of millions of dollars here, up to $100 million there, $1.5 billion aimed at the underlying interconnects over the next decade, are all converging on the same strategic goal: building the connective infrastructure that a future quantum internet will eventually depend on. Regional testbeds in Chicago, Berkeley, and beyond are proving out the physics and the engineering in real fiber optic cable running beneath real American cities. Industry giants are showing up as partners rather than spectators. And in parallel, an entirely separate but deeply connected effort is racing to rebuild the cryptographic foundations of the digital world before quantum computers become powerful enough to threaten them. None of this happens overnight, and anyone promising an imminent, world-changing quantum internet within the next year or two is almost certainly overselling where the technology actually stands today. But the direction of travel is unmistakable, and the money now backing that direction is real, substantial, and according to the people actually building this infrastructure, showing no signs of slowing down despite broader turbulence in federal science funding. The question worth sitting with isn't really whether a quantum internet is coming. Based on where the funding, the research, and the physics all currently point, some version of it almost certainly is. The real question is whether the institutions responsible for protecting your data, your money, and your privacy will finish upgrading their defenses before that future fully arrives, or whether they'll find out the hard way that the clock everyone kept talking about was quietly running out the entire time. For now, the safest assumption is also the most useful one. Treat this less like a distant science fiction plot twist and more like a slow-moving, extremely well-funded infrastructure project, similar in spirit to the early build-out of the original internet decades ago, when almost nobody outside a small circle of researchers understood what was being built or why it would eventually matter to absolutely everyone. Back then, few people could have predicted how completely the early, obscure research project would come to reshape daily life. This time, at least, we get to watch it happen with our eyes open, one grant, one testbed, and one carefully engineered mile of fiber optic cable at a time. And whatever happens next, whether the full national quantum internet arrives in 5 years or 15, the institutions paying attention right now, upgrading their defenses early and treating this transition as urgent rather than distant, are the ones far less likely to be caught off guard when it finally does.